The diner was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the wind howling across the Wyoming plains outside. I was staring into my coffee, just trying to find the will to climb back into the cab and face that black ice again, when I felt a tug on the sleeve of my jacket. I looked down. It was a little boy, maybe 6 years old, holding a plastic dinosaur so tight his knuckles were white. He was trembling, not from the cold, it was warm in there, but from a terror that no kid should ever know. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, eyes darting toward the back hallway. "Sir, my mummy's crying in the bathroom. She says he's going to hurt us again." Before I could even set my mug down, the men's room door slammed open. A man walked out, smelling like cheap bourbon and stale rage. He scanned the room, saw the kid next to me, and his eyes went dead flat. He didn't see a threat. He just saw an old trucker in a faded flannel shirt. He grinned, and that's when I knew one of us wasn't walking out of this diner tonight. The I-80 corridor through Wyoming in deep December isn't a road. It's a gauntlet. The wind creates these ground blizzards that erase the world, turning the asphalt into a sheet of polished obsidian. I'd been fighting the wheel of the old girl, my '98 Peterbilt 379, for 6 hours straight, hauling a flatbed of structural steel that felt like it wanted to slide off the mountain every time I touched the brakes. My shoulders were tight knots of tension, and my eyes felt like they were packed with sand. I needed off the road, not want. Need. I pulled into Sal's stop near Wamsutter. It wasn't a pilot or a TA. It was one of those gravel lot relics that time forgot. The kind of place where the neon sign buzzes like an angry hornet and the coffee tastes like battery acid and burnt toast. But it had parking. And right now, that was enough. I backed the rig in, the air brakes hissing a long sigh of relief that matched my own. I let the engine idle. You don't shut a diesel down in 10-degree weather unless you want a frozen block of iron in the morning, and climbed down. The wind hit me like a physical slap, stealing the breath right out of my lungs. I pulled my collar up, locked the door, and crunched across the frozen gravel toward the warm yellow glow of the diner windows. Inside, the place smelled of grease, pine sol, and exhaustion. There were 3 other booths occupied, a couple of locals in Carhartt coveralls talking about cattle prices, a young couple who looked like they were reconsidering their cross-country move, and a waitress named Verify Tag Betty who looked like she'd been working this shift since the Reagan administration. I took a stool at the counter, facing the window so I could keep an eye on my truck. Old habits die hard. Coffee, black, and whatever pie isn't frozen in the middle, I said, my voice rasping a bit from disuse. Betty poured the mug without a word, her eyes tired. Apples fresh. Weather's turning worse out there, sugar. Sheriff says they might close the gate at Rawlins. Just my luck, I muttered, wrapping my hands around the ceramic mug, letting the heat soak into my callous palms. I was 2 bites into the pie when the door chimed. The wind howled as it opened, letting in a swirl of snow, and a man who looked like trouble wrapped in a leather jacket. He was big, not trucker strong, but gym strong. Show muscles. He had that swagger that screams insecurity masked as dominance. Behind him trailed a woman and a young boy. The woman was small, huddled into a coat that wasn't heavy enough for this weather. She kept her head down, her posture screaming submission. The boy, the one with the plastic dinosaur, trailed behind her, his eyes wide and wet. They sat in a booth in the back corner. The man didn't slide in. He sat on the edge, dominating the space. He started talking immediately, low and sharp. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the tone. It was the venomous hiss of a bully chipping away at someone's soul. I saw the woman flinch. I saw the boy shrink into the vinyl seat. I turned back to my coffee. "None of your business, Jack," I told myself. "You're hauling steel, not justice. You're tired, you're old, just drink the coffee." But the gut check, that instinct that kept me alive in the sandbox overseas and on these highways for 30 years, was pinging. The air in the diner had changed. It felt heavy, static charged. A few minutes later, the woman stood up. She whispered something to the man. He grabbed her wrist, fast, violent. She froze. He held it for a second too long, staring at her with a look that promised pain, then shoved her hand away. She grabbed the boy's hand and hurried toward the restrooms down the narrow hallway past the kitchen. The man watched them go, then pulled out a phone, tapping furiously. He looked up, caught my eye in the reflection of the window, and held the gaze. A challenge. "What are you looking at, old man?" I looked away, not out of fear, but out of discipline. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted to wait out the storm. 10 minutes passed. The man ordered a burger, ate half of it in 3 bites, and started checking his watch. He was agitated, leg bouncing. That's when the boy came out alone. He moved silently, like he was trying not to disturb the air molecules. He didn't go back to the booth. He drifted toward the counter, his eyes locked on the man's back, then shifted to me. Maybe it was the fact that I was the biggest guy in the room. Maybe it was just desperation. But he walked right up to my stool. That's when he tugged my sleeve. That's when he whispered the words that changed the night. "Sir, my mommy's crying in the bathroom. She says he's going to hurt us again." My heart stopped. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Adrenaline dumped into my system, the kind that sharpens your vision and slows down time. I looked at the kid. He was terrified. "What's your name, son?" I asked, keeping my voice low, calm. Rolling thunder in the distance. "Leo," he whispered. "Okay, Leo, you stand right here behind my stool. Don't move." Before I could formulate a plan, the man, let's call him Viper, because he had that snake-like look in his eyes, stood up. He realized the family hadn't returned. He turned and saw Leo standing next to me. "Leo, get your ass over here!" Viper barked. The sound cracked through the quiet diner like a whip. The locals stopped talking. The young couple froze. Betty dropped a spoon. Leo flinched and grabbed the back of my flannel shirt. I didn't turn around. I took a sip of coffee. "He's fine right here," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It was the voice I used when I had to tell a rookie he was about to jackknife on a grade. Firm. Final. I heard the heavy thud of boots on linoleum. Viper was coming over. "Excuse me?" Viper said, his voice dripping with mock politeness that barely covered the violence underneath. He stopped 2 feet from me. I could smell the bourbon on him now. "I'm talking to my stepson. Mind your business, Grandpa." I swiveled the stool slowly. I didn't stand up yet. I wanted him to underestimate me. I wanted him to think I was just some overweight steering wheel holder. "He looks scared, son," I said, meeting his eyes, "and he says his mom is crying. Seems to me they need a minute." Viper laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "You don't know who I am, do you? I own this town. I own that woman. And I own that brat. Now move." He reached for Leo. I moved. It wasn't a haymaker punch. It wasn't a movie move. I just stood up, all 6'4" of me, and placed my body between him and the boy. I used to be a linebacker before the army, and I've spent decades throwing chains over cargo. I'm heavy, and I don't move unless I want to. "I said," I rumbled, looking down at him. "Give them a minute." Viper took a step back, surprised by the size of the obstacle that had just unfolded from the stool. His eyes narrowed. "You're making a big mistake. You're just a transient, a drift. I live here. My brother is the deputy on duty tonight. You touch me, you go to jail. I touch you, self-defense." "Is that right?" I asked. The bathroom door opened. The woman, Leo's mom, stepped out. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes red and puffy. She saw us, the standoff, and the color drained from her face. "Sarah!" Viper yelled. "Get the kid! We're leaving, now!" Sarah looked at me, then at Viper. She was trembling. "Please, Mark, just let us stay here. The roads are bad. You've been drinking." "I said get in the truck," Mark roared, lunging forward to grab her. He made the mistake of trying to push past me. He shoved my chest. That was the line. I caught his wrist as he reached for her. I didn't crush it, but I applied the red line clamp, a grip strength forged by years of tightening load binders. I twisted slightly, locking his elbow. "Don't touch her," I said. Mark let out a yelp of pain and swung with his free hand, a sloppy hook aimed at my jaw. I slipped it, barely, I'm not as fast as I used to be, and the punch grazed my ear. It stung, waking up the old warhorse inside me completely. I shoved him back. He stumbled, crashing into an empty table, sending napkin dispensers and ketchup bottles flying. "All right, that's enough!" Betty yelled from behind the counter, reaching for the phone. "Don't call the cops!" Mark screamed, scrambling to his feet. He looked wild now, humiliated. "You call the cops, Betty, and I'll tell them about your little side business. Don't test me." Betty hesitated, the receiver hovering in her hand. Fear. This guy really did have a grip on these people. Mark straightened his jacket. He was breathing hard, smiling a twisted, manic smile. Okay, tough guy. You want to play hero? You want to protect the damsel?" He pulled out his phone again. "Let's see how tough you are when the odds even up." He dialed a number, putting it on speaker. "Yeah, bring the boys. Sal, stop, I got a problem. A fat trucker thinks he's Rambo. Bring the bats. Yeah, all of them." He hung up and looked at me. "You're trapped, old man. Roads are closed. My boys are 10 minutes out. You can't leave and you can't stay." He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. "And you're going to pay for this embarrassment." Sarah was sobbing now, clutching Leo. "Please," she whispered to me. "Please, you have to leave. They'll kill you. He runs a moving crew. They're bad men. They put a guy in the hospital last month." I looked at the window. The snow was coming down harder, horizontal streaks of white in the darkness. I looked at my reflection. Grey beard, tired eyes. I looked at Leo, clutching that dinosaur like it was the only solid thing in the world. I could walk away. I could get in my truck, lock the doors, and drive into the storm. I'd probably make it. But then I remembered a promise I made to myself a long time ago, back in a desert far away, after I failed to save someone who mattered. Never again. Not on my watch. I turned to Mark. "You think you're the storm?" I said quietly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my CB radio mic. I always carry a handheld for spotter checks. I keyed it up. "Breaker 19. This is red line at Sal's stop, mile marker 173. I got a code red situation. Woman and child in distress. Hostiles inbound. I'm outnumbered. Any of the Brotherhood in the area, I could use some ears, and maybe some high beams." Static hissed. Then silence. Mark laughed. "Nobody's listening, Grandpa. Nobody cares. It's just you and me until my boys get here. And then, it's just me." He pulled a knife from his belt, a hunting knife, 6 inches of serrated steel. The light glinted off the blade. "Nobody leaves," Mark hissed, stepping between us and the door. "We wait." The diner was a tomb. The wind screamed outside, battering the glass. I squared my shoulders, putting myself fully in front of Sarah and Leo. I had no weapon, just my hands and the heavy maglite clipped to my belt. "Step back, Sarah," I said, not taking my eyes off the blade. 10 minutes, Mark taunted, checking his watch. Tick-tock. I calculated the distance. If he lunged, I'd take the cut to the arm to protect the kid. I braced my back leg. But then the floor vibrated. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming, deep, basset hound deep. It was the sound of a Detroit diesel engine downshifting, then another, then the distinct whistle of a turbocharger spooling down. Lights swept across the diner windows, high-intensity LEDs blindingly bright, cutting through the snow. 1 set, 2 sets, 3. Mark frowned, glancing at the window. "What the—" The CB on my belt crackled to life, loud and clear in the silent diner. "Red line, this is Iron Bear on the approach." "I copy your code red. I got Pipeline and Ghost with me. We were running a convoy to Salt Lake. We see the 4-wheelers pulling in. Looks like a welcoming party. You hold the line, driver. The cavalry is here." Mark's face went pale. Outside, in the swirling snow, the silhouette of 3 massive semi-trucks pulled into the lot, blocking the entrance, surrounding the smaller pickup trucks that had just arrived. Mark's boys. I looked at Mark. I smiled. but it didn't reach my eyes. "You made a call," I said softly. "I made one too." I took a step forward. "Put the knife down, son, or you're going to find out what 40 tons of Brotherhood feels like." Mark looked at the door. He looked at me. He looked at the knife. And then the front door of the diner opened again. But it wasn't Mark's friends. It was a man the size of a vending machine, wearing a vest covered in patches. Iron Bear. And behind him, 2 others holding tire thumpers, heavy wooden clubs used to check air pressure. Mark swallowed hard. The knife wavered. "We can settle this," Mark stammered, backing up. "Oh, we're gonna settle it," Iron Bear said, his voice like gravel in a mixer. He looked at me. "You good, Redline?" "I'm good," I said, "but the lady and the kid, they're leaving with us." Mark lunged. It was a desperate, stupid move. He realized his power was evaporating, and he panicked. He swung the knife wildly at me, screaming. The blade came in low and fast, an underhand arc aimed at my gut. I didn't have time to think. Instinct took over. The kind of muscle memory burned into your nervous system when you spend your 20s in places where the sand is hot and the locals aren't friendly. I twisted my hips, sucking in my stomach, but I wasn't 20 anymore. I was 54, tired and stiff from a 12-hour haul. I felt the knife snag. It sliced through the heavy flannel of my shirt and the thermal Henley underneath, biting into the skin just above my hip bone. A hot, sharp line of fire. But Mark had committed too much weight to the thrust. He was off balance. I stepped in, closing the distance, and brought my forearm down hard on his wrist. I heard the snap of connective tissue straining, followed by a scream that was more shock than pain. The knife clattered to the linoleum floor. Before he could recover, I grabbed a handful of his leather jacket and slammed him backward. He hit the edge of the booth table hard, the air leaving his lungs in a wheezing whoosh. "Stay down!" I roared, the adrenaline finally surging past the fatigue. Mark scrambled, eyes wild, trying to regain his footing on the slick floor, reaching for the knife that was spinning away near the counter. He never reached it. A boot size 15, encased in oil-resistant rubber and steel, came down on the blade. Clang! Iron Bear stood there, a towering wall of humanity. He looked down at Mark like he was a bug on a windshield. Iron Bear, real name unknown. Legend says he once pulled a stuck rig out of a ditch by hand, crossed his massive arms. "You dropped your toy, little man," Iron Bear rumbled. His voice vibrated in your chest, deeper than a jake break in a tunnel. Mark froze. He looked up at Iron Bear, then at the 2 other truckers flanking him. Pipeline was a wiry, jagged guy with grease permanently etched into his skin, holding a tire thumper loosely in his right hand. Ghost was younger, silent, wearing a hoodie up over a ball cap, his eyes scanning the room with terrifying precision. This is assault," Mark gasped, holding his wrist. "You're all going to jail. My brother is—" "Your brother ain't here yet," Pipeline spat, stepping closer. "But we are." I put a hand on my side. It came away wet and red, not a gusher, but a steady flow. "Jack!" Sarah cried out from the corner. She had Leo pulled tight against her chest, her hands covering his ears. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine," I lied, my voice tight. "Just a scratch." I looked at Iron Bear. "Watch him. He's got friends outside. He called in a crew." Iron Bear nodded, his expression darkening. "Yeah. We saw 'em. 4 pickup trucks lifted, blocking the exit. Looks like they're waiting for a signal." "They're not waiting," Mark sneered from the floor, regaining some of his venom now that he wasn't being actively hit. "They're getting ready to burn this place down with you in it. You think you can just roll into my town and take over? You're nothing. You're road trash." I walked over to him. I was bleeding, I was angry, and I was done with his mouth. I leaned down, getting right in his face. "Listen to me," I said, my voice dropping to that dangerous quiet. "I don't care who you are. I don't care about your town. Tonight, this diner is sovereign territory, and you just declared war on the wrong army." The glass of the front door shattered. A baseball bat poked through the hole where the open sign used to be, clearing the jagged shards. The wind howled in, carrying snow and shouting voices. "Mark, you in there?" a voice bellowed from the storm. "We're coming in," Betty shrieked and ducked behind the counter. The young couple in the booth scrambled under their table. "Secure the door," I barked. Ghost moved instantly, shoving a heavy table against the entrance. Pipeline stood next to him, hefting the tire thumper. "Iron Bear," I said, "keep an eye on our friend here. Don't let him move." "He moves, he breaks," Iron Bear promised. I limped toward the window. My side was throbbing now, a deep, rhythmic ache. I peered out into the swirling white chaos. The scene outside was a nightmare bathed in high beams. Mark's crew had parked their trucks in a semicircle around the diner entrance. I counted 8 men, maybe 10. They were bundled in heavy coats, holding bats, tire irons, and lengths of chain. They looked like a pack of wolves circling a wounded elk. They were shouting, hyping themselves up, drunk on mob mentality and probably cheap beer. But behind them, was the real story. My truck, the old girl, sat idling where I left her. But she wasn't alone anymore. Iron Bear's rig, a massive Kenworth W900 with a custom moose bumper that looked like a cowcatcher on a locomotive, was parked diagonally, blocking the east exit. Pipeline's Freightliner was blocking the west. Ghost's Peterbilt was nose to nose with one of the pickups, its LED light bar searing the paint off the Ford's hood. The truckers had created a fortress, a steel corral. "Hey!" one of the men outside yelled, slamming his bat against the siding of the diner. "Send Mark out, and the girl, or we start breaking windows." I looked back at Sarah. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. Leo was staring at me, his plastic dinosaur clutched like a talisman. "Sarah," I said gently, "is there a back way?" "Kitchen door," she whispered, "but it leads to the alley. It's fenced in. Dead end." "Okay." I turned to the truckers. "We can't fight them in here. Too much glass, too many civilians. If they toss a Molotov or just storm the place, someone innocent gets hurt." "So what's the play, Redline?" Pipeline asked, his eyes dancing with a reckless sort of light. I took a breath, wincing as the cold air hit my wound. "We go out. We de-escalate or we finish it." "I like the second option," Iron Bear grunted. "No," I said. "We hold the line. We buy time." I made a call on the CB, but I also triggered the SOS on my ELD, electronic logging device. "Company dispatch knows something is wrong, but we need law enforcement." Mark laughed from the floor. "I told you, my brother is the law. He's on his way. When he gets here, you're the ones leaving in cuffs, aggravated assault, kidnapping. I'll have your CDLs shredded." He was so confident it made my skin crawl, because in small towns like this, sometimes he was right. I've seen it before, the local badge protecting the local bully because they played football together in high school. "Let's go," I said to Pipeline and Ghost. "Iron Bear, you stay with the family. If anyone comes through that back door, you make them regret being born." "Copy that," Iron Bear said, cracking his knuckles. I unlocked the front door. Ghost shoved the table aside. We stepped out into the blizzard. The cold was shocking. It instantly numbed the sweat on my face and bit into my open wound. The wind was screaming, whipping snow into our eyes. The mob fell silent for a second as we emerged. 3 truckers, one old and bleeding, one wiry and crazy-looking, one silent and shadowy. "Where's Mark?" the leader of the mob yelled. He was a bearded guy in a camo jacket holding a crowbar. "Mark is indisposed," I shouted over the wind. "Go home, boys, this is over." "It ain't over till we say it is," Camo Jacket yelled. He took a step forward. "You truckers think you own the road? You come into our town, take up our space." It was the usual grievance. Misplaced anger, looking for a target. "We're just passing through," I said, keeping my hands visible. "Nobody wants trouble." "You got trouble," another guy yelled. He wound up and threw a beer bottle. It shattered against the wall next to my head. That was the signal. The mob surged forward. "Line," I yelled. Pipeline and Ghost stepped up to my shoulders. We formed a wedge. Camo Jacket swung the crowbar at me. I didn't have the speed to dodge it this time, not with my side burning. I raised my arm to block, bracing for the bone-breaking impact, but it never came. A blast of air, so loud it vibrated my fillings, tore through the night. Honk! The air horn of Iron Bear's Kenworth. He must have reached through the window or had a remote trigger. It was deafening. The mob flinched, and then blue and red lights exploded in the distance. They were coming from the highway off-ramp, not one cruiser. 3. They were flying low, sirens wailing, cutting through the snow. "Cops!" someone in the mob yelled. "Finally!" Camo Jacket sneered, lowering the crowbar. "Deputy Miller is here. Now you're screwed." The cruisers skidded into the lot, fishtailing on the ice before coming to a halt. The doors flew open. A man stepped out of the lead car. He wasn't wearing a parka. He was in a beige uniform, hat pulled low. Deputy Miller, Mark's brother. I recognized the jawline. He walked into the circle of light, his hand resting on his holster. He looked at the mob, gave a subtle nod to Camo Jacket, and then turned his gaze to me. "Drop the weapons!" Miller shouted. The mob dropped their bats and chains instantly, smirking. They knew the drill. "You 3, Miller pointed at us. "Hands on your heads, now!" "Officer," I started. "We were defending." I said, "Hands on your heads or I tase you right now." Miller screamed, his face turning red. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace, assault, and inciting a riot." Pipeline looked at me. "Red line?" "Do it," I said. "Don't give him a reason." We laced our fingers behind our heads. Miller walked up to me. He saw the blood on my shirt. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just smiled. A cruel, thin smile. "My brother inside?" he asked softly. "He's alive," I said. "We'll see about you," Miller whispered. He spun me around and shoved me hard against the hood of the nearest pickup. He kicked my legs apart. "You truckers think you're kings. Tonight you're just prisoners." He slapped the cuffs on me, tight, cutting off circulation. "Deputy," I said, pressing my cheek against the cold metal of the truck hood, "you might want to check the dashcam on my rig before you do this." "I don't need to check anything," Miller spat. "I have 10 witnesses here who say you attacked them. You're going away for a long time, old man." He hauled me up and dragged me toward his cruiser. Pipeline and Ghost were being cuffed by the other deputies. The mob was cheering, laughing, high-fiving. Mark stumbled out of the diner, clutching his wrist. He saw me in cuffs and let out a howl of triumph. I told you, you old fool. Nobody touches me." He walked up to me as Miller held me. Mark leaned in, his breath hot and foul. "I'm going to go back in there," he whispered, "and I'm going to finish what I started with Sarah, and there is nothing you can do about it." Miller laughed. "Get in the car." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the nightmare scenario. The injustice pillar was standing tall, casting a shadow over everything. I had failed, or so they thought. I looked at Mark. I looked at Miller, and for the first time that night, I let myself smile. A real smile. "I wouldn't go back in there if I were you, Mark," I said. "Why?" Mark mocked. "Because of the big bad bear?" "No," I said. "Because of who I called before I stepped out." Miller paused, his hand on the car door. "Who did you call?" I looked toward the highway entrance. "Them." Through the storm, new lights appeared. Not the flashing red and blue of the local deputies. These lights were all blue, crisp, piercing, and there were a lot of them. 4 black SUVs with state markings roared into the lot, flanking the deputies' cars. The lead vehicle didn't slow down gently. It came in aggressive, cutting off Miller's cruiser. Troopers in grey uniforms poured out. They moved differently than the deputies. Sharp, professional, rifles at the low ready. "State police!" A voice boomed over a PA system. "Nobody moves! All deputies! Step away from the suspects!" Miller froze. "What the hell? This is my jurisdiction!" A tall trooper, wearing the stripes of a sergeant major, stepped out of the lead SUV. He walked straight toward us, ignoring the wind, ignoring the mob. He had a face like carved granite. He stopped in front of Miller. He looked at the cuffs on my wrists, then he looked at my face. His eyes widened slightly. "Uncuff him," the sergeant major said. His voice wasn't a request. "Now wait a minute," Miller sputtered. "This man is a suspect in—" "I said," the trooper stepped closer, towering over Miller, "uncuff him, or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Miller's hands shook as he fumbled for his keys. The click of the cuffs unlocking was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I rubbed my wrists and looked at the trooper. "It took you long enough, Jim," I said. The trooper, Jim Hardtop Reynolds, a man I'd served with in the Gulf, a man whose life I'd saved in a burning convoy 30 years ago, cracked a grin. "Roads were bad, Jack. Had to chain up." He turned to the deputies. "Secure these men," he pointed to the mob and Mark, "and take Deputy Miller's weapon. He's suspended pending an internal investigation." "On what grounds?" Mark screamed as a trooper slammed him against the wall. "You have no proof." "Actually," I said, reaching into my pocket, the one on my uninjured side. I pulled out my smartphone. "I do." I held it up. The screen was glowing. "I wasn't just calling dispatch," I said, my voice carrying over the wind so everyone could hear. "I've been live streaming to the Truckers Against Trafficking watch group for the last 20 minutes, and my Dashcam—" I pointed to the old girl. "She's been recording in 4K high definition since I pulled in, audio and video." I turned the phone around. On the screen, thousands of comments were scrolling by, viewers, witnesses. "You're famous, Mark," I said, cold and dry. "And you too, Deputy. The whole world just watched you threaten a woman and try to frame a veteran." Mark's face went the color of old ash. He slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of him like dirty water. Jim put a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Jack? You're bleeding." "I'll live," I said, "but there's a little boy inside who thinks monsters are real. I need to go tell him the monsters are gone." Jim nodded. "Go. We got this trash." I turned back to the diner. The wind was still howling, but it didn't feel as cold anymore. I walked past the stunned mob, past the shamed deputy, and back through the broken door. Iron Bear was still standing guard by the booth. When he saw me, he let out a breath he must have been holding for 10 minutes. Sarah looked up, terror still in her eyes. Is he gone?" she whispered. I walked over to the booth. I knelt down, ignoring the screaming pain in my side, so I was eye level with Leo. He was still holding that dinosaur. "Leo," I said softly. He looked at me. "You know how knights fight dragons?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Well," I pointed out the window where the troopers were loading Mark into the back of a black SUV. "Sometimes the knights drive 18-wheelers, and the dragon is gone. He's not coming back." Leo looked out the window. He watched the car drive away. Then he looked back at me. He dropped the dinosaur. He threw his little arms around my neck and buried his face in my bloody flannel shirt. He sobbed, a deep, heaving release of fear. I hugged him back. I closed my eyes. And that's when the pain finally caught up to me, and the room started to spin. "Jack!" I heard Iron Bear yell as the floor came up to meet me. I woke up to the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a monitor and the smell of industrial cleaner. My side felt like it had been kicked by a mule, a dull, throbbing ache under heavy bandages. "About time, Sleeping Beauty," a voice said from the corner. It was Jim. He was sitting in a plastic chair, his trooper hat resting on his knee. Outside the window, the sun was coming up, turning the Wyoming snow into blinding fields of diamonds. The storm had broken. "How long?" I rasped. My throat was dry. "Couple of hours," Jim said. 12 stitches. Lost a pint of blood. But the doc says you're too stubborn to die." He stood up and walked to the bed. "Mark is in county lockup, no bail. The dashcam footage. Jack, it's everywhere. The prosecutor has already called. They're throwing the book at him. Attempted murder, kidnapping, corruption. His brother is turning state's evidence to save his own skin." I nodded, staring at the ceiling. "And Sarah. The boy. They're safe," Jim said softly. "Victim Services has them. They're going to her sister's in Montana. We're providing the escort." The door creaked open. Sarah peeked in, Leo hiding behind her legs. She looked exhausted, but the terror was gone, replaced by a fragile sort of hope. "We just wanted to say thank you," she whispered. She walked over and took my hand. Her grip was strong. "You gave us our lives back." I felt that familiar tightness in my throat, the one I usually push down with coffee and miles. "I just did what needed doing, ma'am. You're the one who was brave." Leo stepped out. He walked up to the bed, his eyes solemn. He wasn't holding the dinosaur anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, a battered green T-Rex. He placed it gently on the white sheet next to my hand. "He keeps the bad guys away," Leo said, his voice serious. "Now he can watch your truck." I looked at the plastic toy, then at the kid. I swallowed hard. "I'll keep him right on the dashboard, Leo. He'll be the best co-driver I ever had." They left a few minutes later. Jim offered to drive me to a hotel, but I shook my head. "Take me to the old girl," I said. "I got a schedule to keep." An hour later, I was climbing, slowly, painfully, into the cab. Iron Bear and the boys had already left, but they'd topped off my tanks and cleaned the snow off my windshield. A note was stuck to the steering wheel. "Running heavy, driver. Watch your six. Bear." I placed the green dinosaur on the dash, right next to my bobblehead hula girl. I fired up the engine. The big diesel roared to life, shaking the frame, vibrating through the soles of my boots. It was the only heartbeat I really understood. I put it in gear and rolled out of the lot, leaving the shattered glass and the bad memories in the rearview mirror. The highway stretched out ahead, long and grey and endless. I was sore, I was tired, and I was alone again. But as I shifted into high gear and watched the sun climb over the mountains, I felt light. I wasn't a hero, I was just a trucker, and the road was calling. Drivers, drop a comment with where you're listening from, city, state, or the mile marker you call home. And if you want more road stories like this, hit subscribe so the next run finds you.